Neera drifted through the bustling morning market, her slender fingers passing through fruits she couldn't touch, her luminescent eyes scanning faces that looked through her. 7 Earth years she had been here, 7 years of isolation after her escape pod crashed in the remote mountains of what humans called Colorado. "Excuse me," she whispered to a woman examining apples, knowing no sound would register. The woman shivered slightly, rubbed her arms, and moved away. Neera had developed a theory: she had died in the crash and now existed as what humans called a ghost. It explained why no one saw her, why she could pass through certain objects if she concentrated, why the cold never bothered her crystalline skin. What other explanation could there be? Her transmitter was destroyed in the crash, her people likely believed her dead, and no rescue would come. She wandered into a small bookstore, one of her few pleasures. Here, she could read over shoulders, absorbing human knowledge, culture, and language. Today, a tall man with unruly brown hair sat in the corner, reading a book on quantum physics. Something about him caught her attention, perhaps the intensity of his green eyes or the way his fingers traced equations as if they were sacred texts. Thomas Reed was having a peculiar morning. The prickling sensation at the back of his neck hadn't subsided since he'd entered the bookstore. Years of work in experimental perception studies had made him sensitive to anomalies others missed. Something was here. Someone was watching him. He glanced up from his book and saw her, faint but unmistakable. A woman with nearly translucent skin that caught the light like opal, with eyes too large and limbs too delicate to be human. She stood frozen, staring directly at him with an expression of shock. "Hello," he said quietly, unsure if she could hear him. Neera stepped backward, knocking into a shelf of books that didn't fall. You can see me?" Her voice sounded strange even to herself, unused after years of silence. Thomas set his book down carefully. "Yes, I can see you. Not clearly, but you're definitely there." He looked around, noting that no one else in the store showed any awareness of their exchange. "I don't think anyone else can, though. No one has. Not for 7 years." Neera's voice trembled. Am I a ghost?" Thomas smiled gently. "I don't think so. You seem more like a frequency issue to me." He stood slowly, as if afraid of frightening her, and approached with an outstretched hand. "May I?" Neera hesitated. If she was a ghost, his hand would pass through her like everyone and everything else. If not, what was she? "Yes," she whispered. Thomas reached forward, and his fingers connected with her arm. Warm, solid, real. Neera gasped at the sensation, the first physical contact she'd had since the crash. Something electric passed between them, a recognition that transcended species. "You're real," Thomas said, wonder in his voice. "Absolutely real." Tears formed in Neera's eyes, small droplets that sparkled like diamonds. "How? Why can only you see me?" "I've spent years studying perception beyond the typical human range." His hand remained on her arm, as if afraid she might disappear. "Your visible form must exist just outside normal human perception. But you're not a ghost. You're just operating on a different wavelength." The realization crashed through Neera like a wave. She wasn't dead. She wasn't a ghost. She was just invisible to most humans. "My name is Thomas Reed," he said, finally withdrawing his hand. "And I think I can help you." "Neera," she responded, her true name unpronounceable in human language. "My designation is Neera." "Well, Neera," Thomas said, gathering his books quickly, "I think we have a lot to talk about. Would you come with me to my lab? I have equipment there that might help us understand more about your unique situation." Neera hesitated. For 7 years, she had existed in isolation, convinced of her own non-existence. Now this human, this Thomas, offered connection, explanation, perhaps even hope. Yes, she decided. I will come with you. As they left the bookstore, Thomas walking slowly so she could follow, Neera felt a curious lightness. The world looked different now that someone could see her. Even if it was just one person, she was no longer a phantom. She existed. What she didn't yet understand was that Thomas Reed had his own secrets, and that their meeting was far from accidental. Thomas Reed's laboratory was nestled in the basement of his Victorian-style home on the outskirts of town. Unlike the sterile white environments Neera had seen in human films, this space was warm with wood paneling, vintage scientific instruments, and walls lined with books. Only a corner dedicated to modern equipment, computers, scanners, and devices Neera couldn't identify, betrayed its true purpose. You live alone? Neera asked, noticing the silence of the house above them. Thomas nodded, adjusting dials on what appeared to be a modified spectrometer. My work requires privacy. And I've always been something of a loner. He glanced up with a half-smile. Ironic that I'm the one who can see you, isn't it? Neera studied his face, so alien yet somehow familiar in its expressions. Perhaps not ironic. Perhaps necessary. For the next several hours, Thomas conducted a series of non-invasive tests. He photographed her with specialized cameras, measured energy emissions from her body, and recorded her voice across different frequency ranges. Neera submitted to each test with nervous curiosity, watching his face grow increasingly animated with each discovery. Remarkable, he murmured, reviewing data on his computer screen. Your physical form exists primarily in a spectrum just beyond human visual perception. You're here, completely physically present, but resonating at a frequency most human eyes simply can't process. But you can see me, Neera said. Thomas turned to her, his green eyes reflecting the blue glow of the screen. I had an accident years ago while working with experimental perception technology. It changed how I see. Most people thought I was hallucinating afterward, but I was actually seeing things that had always been there. He reached toward her hesitantly. May I? Neera nodded, and Thomas placed his palm against her cheek. The warmth of his skin sent a cascade of sensations through her body. Touch had been different on her world, more telepathic than physical. This direct contact was overwhelming, intimate in ways she hadn't anticipated. Your skin, he whispered. It's like touching living crystal. On my world, Neera said, leaning slightly into his touch, we rarely made physical contact. Communication happened through light patterns and electromagnetic fields. She closed her eyes. I never knew touch could feel like this. When she opened her eyes, Thomas was watching her with an intensity that made her step back. The connection had been too much, too soon. I'm sorry, he said quickly. I shouldn't have. No, Neera interrupted. It's not unwelcome. Just new. 7 years without any contact has made me sensitive, Thomas finished. I understand. He turned back to his equipment, giving her space. I think I can develop something to help others see you, if that's what you want. A device that could shift your frequency into the visible spectrum. Neera's heart raced at the possibility. You could do that? It would take time, but yes. He began sketching something on a pad. In the meantime, you could stay here. The guest room upstairs is comfortable, and no one would disturb you. The offer stunned her. A place to belong after years of drifting through human spaces, pretending they were hers. Why would you help me this way? She asked, caution in her voice. No one did something for nothing, that was true across all species. Thomas set down his pen and considered her question. Scientific curiosity, at first, he admitted. But now? I think we could help each other. I've spent years trying to prove that perception can be expanded, that reality is more complex than we acknowledge. He gestured to her. Your proof. That night, Nira experienced her first proper sleep in years, in a real bed rather than the hidden corners where she'd previously sought rest. The sensation of soft sheets against her skin, the luxury of safety, these simple human comforts brought tears to her eyes. In the morning, she found Thomas in his kitchen, preparing what smelled like coffee. He looked up as she entered, a smile warming his features. "I wasn't sure if you eat or drink like we do," he said, offering her a steaming mug. "My body has adapted to process earth nutrients," she explained, accepting the drink. Their fingers brushed in the exchange, sending another jolt of awareness through her. Though certain textures are still challenging. Thomas watched with undisguised fascination as she sipped the coffee. "What was your world like before you came here?" Nira's luminescent eyes clouded with memory. "Beautiful. Crystalline. Our cities were grown, not built, living structures that responded to our needs." She set down the mug. "It's gone now. Or at least, it is to me. You can't return. Even if my transmitter hadn't been destroyed, there would be nothing to return to." She met his gaze directly. "I was escaping when I crashed here. My world was being harvested for its resources. I may be the last of my kind." Thomas's expression shifted to one of profound sympathy. He reached across the table and took her hand in his. This time, Nira didn't pull away from the contact. "Then we have something in common," he said softly. "I've always felt like the last of my kind too." Something electric passed between them as they sat there, hands joined across the table. Nira felt a new sensation building within her, something warm and dangerous and potentially wonderful. On her world, mating had been a pragmatic affair, arranged for genetic diversity. This feeling was something else entirely, something uniquely human. "Thomas," she whispered, "would you show me what it means to be visible? Not to everyone, not yet. Just to you." He understood what she was asking. Standing slowly, still holding her hand, he led her from the kitchen toward his bedroom. Each step was deliberate, giving her time to reconsider, but Nira followed with certainty. 7 years of isolation had taught her the value of connection, and something about this human called to the deepest part of her being. In the soft morning light filtering through his bedroom window, Thomas taught Nira what it meant to be seen completely. Their bodies moved together in a dance as old as humanity yet entirely new to her species. His hands traced the luminescent patterns on her skin, patterns that shifted and glowed with her mounting pleasure. Her alien anatomy surprised and delighted him, the crystalline aspects of her body capturing and reflecting light in ways that made their joining seem almost magical. Afterward, as they lay together in the tangled sheets, Nira realized something had fundamentally changed. She was no longer a ghost, no longer invisible. In Thomas's eyes, in his touch, in his bed, she existed. What she didn't yet know was that in another laboratory across town, instruments had detected their union, recording energy signatures unlike anything seen before. And that Thomas Reed had not been entirely truthful about why he could see her. 3 weeks passed in a blur of discovery. Nira moved through Thomas's home with growing confidence, no longer drifting like a specter but inhabiting space with purpose. In his laboratory, she assisted with experiments, her knowledge of frequencies and energy fields proving invaluable to his research. In his bed, they explored the unexpected compatibility of their bodies, each encounter more intense than the last as Nira learned to channel her species' natural energy manipulation into their intimate moments. But beneath this newfound happiness, secrets festered. Thomas's phone calls always happened behind closed doors. His computer required biometric authentication she couldn't bypass. Occasionally, he disappeared for hours without explanation, returning with a tension around his eyes that even their lovemaking couldn't fully dissolve. Nira had secrets of her own. She hadn't told him about the beacon hidden in her body, dormant since the crash but still intact. She hadn't explained that her species wasn't simply hunted, they were coveted for their unique crystalline biology, which could be harvested to power interstellar travel. Most significantly, she hadn't revealed that she wasn't a refugee but a guardian, sent to assess whether Earth could serve as a sanctuary for her remaining people. These unspoken truths hovered between them like shadows, even in their most intimate moments. On a rain-soaked Tuesday, Thomas left for what he called a meeting with colleagues. Neera watched him drive away, then turned her attention to his laboratory. She had respected his privacy until now, but the frequency modifier he was building to make her visible to other humans was nearly complete. Before she allowed him to activate it, she needed to know exactly who Thomas Reed was. His security systems were sophisticated but not designed to keep out someone with her abilities. Neera placed her palm against the biometric scanner, manipulating her cellular structure to match the pattern stored in its memory. The door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, she bypassed his standard research equipment and went directly to a hidden panel in the far wall, something she had noticed him accessing when he thought she wasn't watching. It slid open at her touch, revealing a secondary computer system and a collection of files. What she found shattered her heart. Project Spectre. A government initiative to identify and capture extraterrestrial refugees hiding on Earth. Thomas Reed, lead researcher, specially modified to perceive beings outside normal human visual ranges. His accident hadn't been an accident at all, but a carefully designed procedure to turn him into a hunter. With trembling hands, Neera opened a folder labeled with what appeared to be her own designation. Inside were detailed observations, biological analyses from samples he must have collected during their intimate moments, and recommendations for containment and study. Tears formed in her eyes, crystallizing as they fell to the floor with soft clicks. She had been a fool, believing herself special when she was merely prey. Even their physical relationship had been a form of research, each passionate encounter meticulously documented afterward. She was contemplating escape when she heard his car returning. Moving quickly, she restored the files and resealed the hidden compartment. When Thomas entered the laboratory, she was sitting calmly at his workbench, examining the frequency modifier as if nothing had changed. "You're back early," she said, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Thomas hung his rain-soaked jacket on a hook. The meeting ended sooner than expected. He approached, placing a kiss on the top of her head, a gesture that now felt like a betrayal. "Any progress with the modifier?" "Some," she replied. "Though I'm beginning to wonder if being visible to everyone is truly what I want." He pulled up a stool beside her, his expression serious. "We've discussed this, Neera. Living as a ghost isn't living at all. And living as a specimen would be better?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Thomas stiffened. "What do you mean?" Neera set down the delicate tool she'd been holding. "Nothing. Just concerns about how humans might react to my appearance." His shoulders relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained watchful. "You'd be surprised how adaptable humans can be." He reached for her hand. "Especially when something is as beautiful as you are." The compliment, once treasured, now felt like acid against her skin. Still, she allowed him to lead her upstairs to their bedroom. If he truly was monitoring her, she couldn't afford to arouse suspicion. Their lovemaking that night had a desperate quality. Neera poured herself into it with theatrical abandon, crying out his name as his body moved within hers, her skin glowing with patterns that reflected not passion but anxiety. Thomas mistook her intensity for desire, unaware that each touch was a goodbye. As he slept afterward, Neera slipped from the bed and dressed quietly. She needed to activate her beacon, to warn any of her kind who might be approaching Earth. This planet was not the sanctuary they had hoped, it was another trap. She was retrieving her few possessions when Thomas's voice came from the darkness. "Going somewhere?" Neera turned slowly. He stood in the doorway, naked and unashamed, but the softness was gone from his eyes. "You accessed my files," he said. "Not a question." And you collected my biological samples without consent, she replied. I believe that makes us even. Thomas ran a hand through his disheveled hair. It's not what you think, Nira. Isn't it? Project Spectre seems quite explicit in its objectives. That was before I met you. He took a step toward her. Yes, I was assigned to find beings like you. Yes, I was modified to see you. But everything that's happened between us, that wasn't part of any project. Nira felt the painful hope rising in her chest. Do you expect me to believe that? I expect you to recognize the truth when you feel it. Thomas placed his hand over his heart. I've submitted false reports. Told them I've found nothing. Because the moment I touched you in that bookstore, everything changed. He reached for her, and despite her better judgment, Nira allowed him to take her hand and place it against his chest. His heartbeat was rapid, frightened. You're not the only one with secrets, he said quietly. I know what you are, Nira. Not just an alien, but a guardian. I know about the beacon in your body. I know your people are looking for a new home. Shock rendered her momentarily speechless. How? Because there are factions within our government, Thomas explained. Some want to capture and study beings like you. Others want to establish contact, to offer sanctuary. I was recruited by the first group, but I've been feeding information to the second. Nira searched his face for deception and found only fear of losing her. Why didn't you tell me? For the same reason you didn't tell me about your beacon. His fingers tightened around hers. Protection. If they knew I had not only found you but fallen in love with you, we would both be in danger. The word love hung in the air between them, unexpected and transformative. In her species, love was a theoretical concept, not a driving force. Yet she recognized the emotion that had been growing within her, this painful, wonderful connection that transcended biology. I need proof, she said finally. Not words. Proof. Thomas nodded, understanding. Tomorrow, I'll show you everything, the communications, the safe houses, the others like you who have found protection. But tonight, he glanced at the small bag she had packed. Tonight, I need you to trust me enough to stay. Nira stood at the precipice of decision. Behind her lay escape, isolation, and safety. Before her stood a human man offering what she had never expected to find on this planet, purpose, connection, and the frightening possibility of love. One night, she agreed. But if you're lying to me, Thomas Reed, you will discover that my species is not simply hunted because we are valuable. We are hunted because we are dangerous. Thomas pulled her against his chest, his heartbeat steady against her ear. I'm counting on it, he whispered. Because tomorrow, we're both going to need to be very dangerous indeed. As they returned to bed, holding each other with newfound awareness, neither noticed the small red light blinking on Thomas's supposedly deactivated phone, a signal that their conversation had been transmitted to parties unknown. Dawn arrived with the sound of breaking glass. Thomas bolted upright, instantly alert. They're here. Earlier than I expected. He grabbed clothes from beside the bed, throwing Nira's garments to her. We have 3 minutes before they breach the secondary entrances. Who? Nira demanded, dressing rapidly. Project Spectre's extraction team. Thomas moved to a painting on the wall, swinging it aside to reveal a small safe. My handler must have been monitoring my communications. Nira's mind raced. You said you were submitting false reports. I was. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside was a small device, a handgun, and several passports. But I've suspected for weeks that Morgan didn't believe me. She's been having me followed. The sound of heavy footsteps on the stairs galvanized them into action. Thomas pressed the device into Nira's hands, the frequency modifier, now compact enough to wear. Put this on. If they can all see you, they can't pretend you don't exist. It gives you certain legal protections. Neera slipped the bracelet-like device onto her wrist. A strange tingling sensation spread across her skin as her visual frequency shifted. Thomas checked the handgun. The emergency exit in my lab leads to a tunnel system. Get to the red door at the end and wait for me there. I'm not leaving you, Neera said fiercely. He turned to her, his expression softening momentarily. Neera, The bedroom door burst open. 3 figures in tactical gear stormed in, weapons raised. Behind them stood a slender woman with silver-streaked black hair and cold eyes. Dr. Reed, she said calmly. Your behavior has been disappointing. Thomas positioned himself partially in front of Neera. Director Morgan. Your timing is impeccable, as always. The woman's gaze shifted to Neera, her eyes widening slightly. So this is your specimen. Remarkable. She addressed the armed men. Secure them both. Separate vehicles. She's not a specimen, Thomas said, his voice hard. She's a refugee seeking asylum, which makes her detainment illegal under the Wellington Protocol. Morgan laughed. The Wellington Protocol applies to human refugees, Dr. Reed. Not to whatever this is. She gestured dismissively at Neera. Something in Neera snapped. 7 years of invisibility, of doubting her own existence, culminating in these humans discussing her as if she were an object. The crystalline structures beneath her skin began to glow with building energy. My name, she said, her voice resonating at a frequency that made the humans wince, is Neera Kalvesh, guardian of the 7th sphere. I am not your specimen. The room's electronics began to malfunction as Neera's energy field expanded. Light bulbs burst, sending showers of sparks onto the carpeting. The armed men hesitated, weapons wavering. Thomas used the distraction to move. His training had never been officially documented, another of Morgan's secrets, but it showed in how efficiently he disarmed the nearest guard. The second guard fired, but Neera extended her field around Thomas, the bullet slowing and dropping harmlessly to the floor. Morgan backed toward the door. Fascinating, she murmured, before turning to flee. Stop her. Thomas shouted, struggling with the third guard. She has a neural disruptor tuned to your frequency. Neera surged forward, her movements blurring with speed. She caught Morgan in the hallway, pinning the human woman against the wall. The director produced a small device from her pocket, but Neera knocked it away before she could activate it. You've been hunting my kind, Neera hissed, her face inches from Morgan's. How many have you captured? Where are they being held? Fear finally broke through Morgan's clinical detachment. You don't understand. We're protecting humanity. Your species is connected to the harvesters. The harvesters destroyed my world. Neera's grip tightened. No, Morgan gasped. Your people called them. We intercepted the transmissions. Your beacons are homing devices for their ships. The accusation hit Neera like a physical blow. You're lying. Check your own technology, Morgan said. Ask yourself why you were really sent here. Thomas appeared beside them, breathing heavily. Don't listen to her, Neera. She's trying to divide us. Morgan laughed, a harsh sound despite her compromised position. Oh, Thomas. Still so naive. Tell her about the others. Tell her what happened to them after you identified them. Neera turned to Thomas, confusion clouding her features. What is she talking about? His expression was grim. I told you there were others like you. What I didn't tell you is that before I joined the resistance within the project, I helped locate 3 of your kind. They were taken to a facility in Nevada. His voice broke slightly. I didn't know then what they planned to do to them. And now? Neera's voice was barely a whisper. Now they're being held in stasis, their energy being harvested to power experimental technology. Thomas's eyes were haunted. That's why I changed sides. That's why I've been trying to protect you. More footsteps sounded on the stairs, reinforcements arriving. Thomas grabbed Morgan's neural disruptor from the floor. We need to go. Now. They ran for the laboratory, sealing the reinforced door behind them. Thomas moved to a bookshelf, pulling it aside to reveal a hidden passage. As they entered the narrow tunnel, the sound of battering rams against the laboratory door echoed behind them. The red door is half a mile ahead, Thomas explained as they ran, the passage dimly lit by emergency lighting. One of my contacts will be waiting with transport. Neera kept pace beside him, her mind reeling with revelations. Is it true? About my beacon? Thomas didn't slow. I don't know. The technology is unlike anything we've seen. But what I do know is that you aren't responsible for what your leaders might have done. They reached an intersection in the tunnels. Thomas hesitated, then pointed left. This way. We're close. Neera grabbed his arm. Thomas, I need to know. If my beacon activates, if it does call the harvesters, would you still help me? He met her gaze, unwavering. Yes. Because I've seen inside you, Neera. Not just physically, but who you are. Whatever your beacon was designed for, your heart is your own. The simple truth of his words washed over her. In that moment, surrounded by darkness and pursued by enemies, Neera made her decision. She pulled Thomas to her, kissing him with an intensity that surprised them both. Her body glowed, illuminating the tunnel around them. When they separated, Thomas looked dazed. What was that for? For seeing me, she said simply. Now run. They reached the red door minutes later, emerging into what appeared to be an abandoned warehouse. A van waited outside, its engine running. Behind the wheel sat a young woman with bright blue hair and multiple piercings. You're late, Reed, she called through the open window. And you brought company. Interesting company. Thomas helped Neera into the van's back seat. Neera, meet Valerie. She's with the Sanctuary Network. Val, this is Neera. Valerie grinned over her shoulder as she accelerated away from the warehouse. Nice to meet you, Starlight. Welcome to the Resistance. As they sped through empty morning streets, Neera gazed out the window at the human world passing by, a world where, for the first time, she was fully visible. The frequency modifier hummed softly on her wrist, a reminder of her new reality. Thomas took her hand. Where are we going? She asked. To meet the others, he replied. The ones we've managed to keep safe. Neera's heart leapt. There are others? Like me? Not exactly like you, Valerie interjected. But refugees, yes. Some visible, some not. All in hiding. As the city fell away behind them, Neera felt something she hadn't experienced since before the destruction of her world, hope. But nestled beneath that hope, a cold fear remained. If Morgan was right about the beacons, if her presence on Earth could somehow summon the harvesters, then her very existence threatened this planet and everyone on it, including the man whose hand now held hers. The beacon within her body pulsed once, responding to her emotional state. Somewhere in the depths of space, something answered. The sanctuary was nothing like Neera had imagined. Not a hidden bunker or military facility, but a sprawling farm in the countryside, its field stretching toward distant mountains. As Valerie drove through the main gates, Neera noticed the subtle security measures, cameras disguised as birdhouses, motion sensors embedded in fence posts, and what appeared to be frequency jammers integrated into the landscape. Home sweet home, Valerie announced, parking beside a red barn that had been converted into a communal space. Well, one of them anyway. We have 12 sanctuaries across the country. Thomas helped Nira from the vehicle, his hand lingering on hers. The residents here call it Haven. Haven. The word resonated through Nira's being. For 7 years, she had wandered without purpose or place. Now, standing on this soil with Thomas beside her, watching as curious faces began to appear in windows and doorways, she felt the first true sense of belonging since her arrival on Earth. The sanctuary's residents emerged slowly to greet them, a mixture of humans and beings Nira immediately recognized as non-terrestrial, though none were of her species. A tall, willowy figure with bark-like skin approached first, extending branched fingers in greeting. "I am Thorin," the being said, voice melodic like wine through leaves. "Elder of Haven." Thomas made the introductions. As they spoke, Nira became aware of a sensation in her chest, her beacon, stirring with proximity to other extraterrestrial energies. She pressed a hand against it, trying to suppress its response. Thorin noticed her discomfort. "You carry something that troubles you, Guardian Nira." "My beacon," she admitted. "It's becoming more active. I fear," she glanced at Thomas, then continued. "I fear it may be a homing device for those who destroyed my world." The gathered crowd murmured with concern. Thorin gestured toward a small stone building set apart from the others. "Come. Our technology may help us understand its true purpose." Inside the building, Haven's scientists, both human and alien, examined Nira's beacon without removing it from her body. Their equipment was a curious hybrid of Earth technology and components clearly salvaged from various crashed vessels. A human scientist named Dr. Elliot studied the readings with growing excitement. "This isn't what Project Spectre believes it to be," he explained. "It's not a homing beacon for harvesters. It's a warning system." "Warning system?" Thomas leaned closer to the display. "Yes. It activates in proximity to other refugee signals, creating a networked alert system. If the harvesters approach, all connected beacons would provide advance notice, allowing for evacuation or defense." Relief flooded through Nira, followed immediately by fresh concern. "But it is transmitting? Into space?" "At extremely low power, yes," Dr. Elliot confirmed. "More like a heartbeat than a message. Enough for your people to know you're alive, not enough to pinpoint your exact location." "My people," Nira echoed softly. For years, she had believed herself the last. Could there be others? "The network is detecting 7 active beacons on Earth," another scientist reported. "Including yours." 7. The number struck Nira like a physical blow. 7 guardians, scattered across this planet. 7 of her kind, surviving against all odds. Thomas squeezed her hand. "We'll find them," he promised. "But first, we need to deal with Project Spectre. Morgan won't stop hunting you, hunting all of you." "She believes she's protecting Earth," Nira said, understanding dawning. "She thinks my beacon will bring destruction." "Then we need to show her the truth," Thomas concluded. The plan they developed over the following days was dangerous but necessary. Using Nira's beacon and Haven's communication technology, they would attempt to contact the other Guardians while simultaneously creating evidence that would expose Project Spectre's unethical activities to the broader government. On the 4th night, as Nira and Thomas lay together in the small cabin they had been assigned, the intimacy between them had evolved into something deeper than physical connection. His fingers traced the luminescent patterns on her skin, patterns that now responded specifically to his touch. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice low in the darkness. Nira considered the question. "Not of what we're about to do," she answered. "But of what comes after." Thomas propped himself up on one elbow, studying her face. "What do you mean?" "If we succeed, if we expose Project Spectre and establish contact with the other Guardians, my purpose here will be fulfilled." She placed a hand against his cheek. "What then becomes of us, Thomas Reed?" A human and a guardian? His answer was to kiss her, pouring everything he couldn't articulate into the connection between them. Their bodies joined with practiced familiarity but newfound desperation, each touch a promise neither was certain they could keep. Afterward, as Thomas slept, Neera made her decision. Whatever happened tomorrow, she would not leave this world, or this man, behind. Dawn brought clear skies and a sense of purpose. The sanctuary's residents gathered around the modified transmitter they had built, a device designed to amplify Neera's beacon signal while simultaneously broadcasting Project Spectre's classified files to government oversight committees. Once we activate this, Thomas warned the assembled group, there's no turning back. Morgan will know exactly where we are. We'll be ready, Valerie assured him, gesturing to the sanctuary's defenses, now fully activated and visible. Neera stepped forward, her body glowing with nervous energy. Whatever happens, I want to thank you all. For 7 years, I believed myself a ghost. You've made me visible again, not just physically, but as a being worthy of existence. Thomas stood beside her, his presence a steadying force. Whenever you're ready. Neera placed her hand on the transmitter, allowing her energy to flow into it. The device hummed to life, sending her beacon signal outward with unprecedented strength while data packets containing Project Spectre's atrocities streamed toward Washington. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then, simultaneously, 2 responses, multiple beacon signals activating across the globe, acknowledging her presence, and the distant sound of helicopters approaching the sanctuary. Morgan, Thomas confirmed after checking a tablet. And she's brought reinforcements. The sanctuary's defenses engaged as 3 military helicopters appeared on the horizon. Residents moved to predetermined positions, ready to protect their home. Thomas pulled Neera toward the main building, but she resisted. No, she said firmly. I need to be visible. Completely visible. Understanding her intent, Thomas nodded reluctantly. They walked together to the center of the sanctuary's main field, standing exposed as the helicopters circled overhead. Director Morgan descended from the lead helicopter, flanked by armed agents. Her cold eyes found Neera immediately. So the ghost reveals herself at last. I was never a ghost, Neera replied, her voice carrying across the field. You simply refused to see me. Morgan's gaze shifted to Thomas. And you, Dr. Reed. A brilliant mind wasted on sentimentality. Not sentimentality, Thomas corrected. Humanity. Something your project seems to have forgotten. Morgan signaled to her agents. Secure them both. And prepare the neural disruptor. Before the agents could move, the sky above them changed. What had been clear blue was suddenly filled with swirling light patterns, communication signals visible only because of their immense power. The helicopter's electronic systems faltered, engines stalling. What is this? Morgan demanded, her composure finally cracking. Neera's body began to glow more intensely, responding to the signals. My people, she said, her voice thick with emotion. The other Guardians are creating a unified field. The light patterns converged above them, forming what appeared to be a portal. Through it came a single figure, crystalline like Neera, but older, his body bearing the scars of survival. Elder Vorn, Neera whispered in recognition. The Elder Guardian surveyed the scene, his gaze lingering on Thomas's protective stance beside Neera. When he spoke, his voice resonated at frequencies that made the human's ears ring. Guardian Neera. You have done well. He turned toward Morgan and her agents. Your fears are misplaced, humans. We are not harbingers of the harvesters. We are their most dedicated enemies. Morgan stood her ground, though her agents had backed away. We intercepted transmissions. You intercepted warnings, Elder Vorn corrected. The beacons you've been hunting are part of an ancient warning network, designed to alert worlds of harvester approach. As if to emphasize his point, the sky above them shimmered again, revealing a translucent map of the galaxy. Certain regions glowed red, harvested worlds. A blue line show.